Just a Little Dare by Huliganships. Chapter 5 Crash and Burn. After running away from the Sunny and their angry carpenter, they were wandering aimlessly through the streets of the city, the only light being the moon in the sky and the occasional streetlight. Their hands were still firmly clasped together, and Sanji was almost feeling giddy with the feeling of happiness and butterflies that were still buzzing through his body. Judging from the grin on Zoro's face, he felt the same. At least, that was what Sanji hoped. He could ask, of course, but he was pretty sure that meant losing the bet, and a small part of him still insisted that this new Zoro would disappear as soon as the bet was over, and Sanji would be left embarrassed, alone, and heartbroken. And that just wasn't a risk he was willing to take. Zoro chose that moment to use the grip he had on Sanji's hand to pull him closer and throw an arm around his shoulder. He pressed a noisy kiss against his cheek and smiled. "I'm hungry," the swordsman announced. Sanji snorted. "What am I supposed to do?" Zoro shrugged his shoulders. "I don't know, you're the cook. Feed me, I guess." "And with what? I don't have any food on me, and I'm pretty sure no restaurants are still open at 2 a.m. Zoro let out a contemplative hum. "We could sneak into the polar tank. How far away from the harbour are we?" "I don't know, I was just following you." "Well, then we can't be too far away." Sanji groaned through his drunken laughter. "I can't believe you got us lost in the middle of the night." "I didn't get us lost," Zoro protested, but he was also giggling, so he wasn't entirely sober either. "Of course you did!" Sanji's stomach was hurting from laughing, but he didn't care. It felt too good to just let loose. "You think Frankie has calmed down already?" Zoro was asking. Thinking back to the enraged face of their crewmate, Sanji couldn't help but giggle again. "No, I don't think so." "What were you thinking, doing that to the Sunny?" Zoro shrugged again. "Wasn't thinking. Wanted to make you happy." Sanji knew the flush on his face wasn't from the cold. He stopped and put his arms around Zoro's neck, smiling when the other's arms automatically wrapped around his waist and pulled him close. Sanji leaned in until their noses were touching. Maybe it was because he was still drunk. Maybe it was because nothing felt quite real in the middle of this snowy night. But in the end, Sanji didn't care at that moment. "Ask me again." Zoro let out a confused sound. "You know what I mean," Sanji insisted, one of his gloved hands sliding up into Zoro's hair. "Ask me again." There was a light of understanding in the other's eyes, before he smiled one of the softest smiles that Sanji had ever seen on the other's face. He desperately hoped the alcohol wouldn't cause him to forget this sight the next morning. This was something that he wanted to treasure until the end of his days. "Hey, Sanji," Zoro whispered, his lips only a breath away from Sanji's. "Are you happy?" The next few seconds felt like a dream, or more accurately, a nightmare. Out of nowhere, a glowing hand grabbed the back of Zoro's head and pulled him back and out of Sanji's arms. In an instinctual movement, Sanji's leg kicked out and connected with whoever had attacked them, making them lose their grip on the other's hair. Zoro fell to the floor, his hands coming up to clutch at his still slightly glowing head. "Oi, are you alright?" Sanji asked, his hands reaching for the other man. Before he could reach him, however, Zoro had already stood up on his own and turned to where his attacker had fallen. "Of course I am! Who is that piece of shit?" "I'm not quite sure, but he brought his friends." Sanji pointed down the street, where a group of 5 more thugs had appeared. One of them seemed familiar. With a start, Sanji recognized him. "Oh, for fuck's sake!" he cursed, his fist balled in a fit of anger. "It's those shitholes from yesterday." "Yesterday?" Zoro asked, sounding a bit confused. "Yeah, the ones who attacked us in the street." "Shit, he still remembers, boss!" one of the men yelled out, suddenly sounding scared. He didn't do his thing." "Shut up!" The man who had been lying on the ground a second before was now scrambling up, holding his heavily bleeding nose. "I got one of them." Worried, Sanji looked over to Zoro, who seemed fine at the least. But what had this Hibiki guy done to him? "Are you sure you're fine?" he asked again. Zoro let out an annoyed huff. "Of course I'm fine. Let's beat the shit out of them and go back to the ship, shitty cook." "What's that?" Sanji tried to tease to lighten the mood. "No calling me darling today." "The fuck?" Zoro asked while drawing his swords. "Are you sure you're fine? You're spouting even more bullshit than usual." And before Sanji could say anything to that, he launched himself at their enemies. Sanji didn't have a choice but to follow him. He ignored the sinking feeling in his stomach and concentrated on making sure the green-haired idiot who had captured his heart wouldn't get himself killed. The fight was over embarrassingly fast. Sanji stood next to Zoro and surveyed the carnage they had left behind. No one was dead, but none of them would be standing any time soon either. Out of reflex, and when had this started to be a reflex he had in the first place, he reached out for Zoro's hand again, only to grab air. Dumbfounded, Sanji looked at the other man, who was cradling his hands against his chest. "What the fuck are you doing?" Sanji raised an eyebrow at that, still ignoring the feeling of dread in his stomach. "Trying to take my boyfriend's hand? What did you think I was doing?" "Boyfriend?" Zoro took a step back. The look on his face was absolutely horrified. "Are you crazy? Did you hit your head in the fight or something?" The dread in his stomach spread through the rest of his body and made him feel numb. "What are you talking about?" Sanji asked, a bit of desperation seeping into his voice. "We've been together for the last few days. Can't you remember?" He tried to grab Zoro's hand again, but the other stayed just out of arm's reach. "Why would I ever agree to date you?" Zoro asked, his tone incredulous. "Because of the bet," Sanji blurted out, his panic spiking. "What bet?" Zoro yelled back, clearly aggravated himself. "The bet we made back on Cobria?" "We are still on Cobria!" Sanji reeled back as if Zoro had slapped him. "What?" he asked, his voice sounding breathless. "We're on our food run, remember?" Now Zoro sounded a bit concerned himself, but he still kept his distance to Sanji. But Sanji didn't even notice anymore, too busy trying to make sense of the situation. In the back of his mind, he wondered how all this looked. Two men standing on the street, surrounded by unconscious bodies, screaming at each other. "Is that the last thing you remember?" Sanji asked, his gaze fixed on Zoro's face. Zoro shot him a glare. "Of course it is!" "Zoro, we're not on Cobria anymore. Look around." With a wide arc of his hand, Sanji gestured to the snow-covered streets around them. Cobria had been a summer island. When the swordsman noticed this, the look on his face morphed into one of confusion. "What the hell? When did we get here? What did you do, shitty cook?" "I didn't do anything. We left Cobria days ago. Do you seriously not remember anything since then?" Zoro scoffed and crossed his arms over his chest. "There's nothing to remember. You're the one acting weird. I bet all of this is your fault." Sanji was this close to ripping out his hair in frustration, or to start crying. In the end, he did neither of those things. He took a deep breath and counted backwards from 10. Everything was fine. Zoro had been hit with something from that weird pirate earlier. Sanji just needed to get him to reverse it. When he turned around to do just that, he noticed that the bodies had disappeared. There were drag marks in the snow. Some of their friends must have arrived and rescued them, while he and Zoro had been occupied shouting at each other. The urge to scream was getting stronger and stronger each second. "Fine, whatever. Let's go back to the ship. If you don't believe me, maybe the others can convince you." He turned around and started walking. He looked back over his shoulder and shouted at the still-standing swordsman. "You better keep up. If you get lost here, I am not going to look for you, shitty mosshead." He turned his head back quickly to hide his expression. Zoro didn't need to know that he was lying, and he also didn't need to see silent tears that had started running down Sanji's face. Zoro was confused. Apparently he was missing his memories of the last 5 days, and if that wasn't concerning enough, in and of itself, what supposedly had happened in those past 5 days was even more worrisome. "I agreed to what?" he asked. He was sitting in the kitchen of the Thousand Sunny, the rest of the Straw Hats and Law, and when did he get here, sitting opposite of him? The only one not present was Sanji. After he dropped him off with a very sleepy Nami, and hadn't that been strange, he had apologized for waking her, but he had still woken her up. Something was definitely not right here, and had given her a clipped explanation. He had just left. "You and Sanji agreed to date each other," Nami repeated her earlier statement, but it still didn't make any sense to him. "After you kissed Sanji, if I may add," Robin said. Zoro's eyes snapped to her, and he could feel his neck heating up in embarrassment. "After I did what?" "After you Usopp started to repeat, but Zoro interrupted him. "I heard you all the first time." "Why are you asking then?" Luffy asked sleepily from where he was leaning against Law's back. "We already explained what happened. Is it really that absurd to believe?" Nami asked. obviously tired. Yes, Zoro answered. No, whispered a tiny voice in his mind, but Zoro was pretty good at not listening to that voice. More importantly, Robin said, her hands wrapped around a cup. Zoro asked himself if Sanji had prepared that for her. We need to figure out what happened to you. Obviously, something that the pirate earlier did to you is the cause of that. We need to figure out if it's permanent, and if there is a way to undo it. The others nodded in agreement, before Nami yawned. Let's talk about it in the morning. No one is hurt, and I can't think when I'm this tired. Well, I don't know about the no one is hurt thing, Usopp whispered, but didn't say anything else when Nami threw a warning glare his way. They made their way back to the sleeping quarters, while Brook took up his post as a lookout on the deck. When they arrived at their bunks, they saw that Sanji was already sleeping. His blanket was pulled up over his ears, and it seemed he was sleeping soundly. Zoro felt the strangest urge to climb into the bed with him, and wrap him up in his arms. Shaking his head to get rid of the weird impulse, he changed into his own sleeping clothes, and went to bed. He did stop for a moment, though, because his favourite shirt and pants were missing, and there were a few new clothes there that he had never seen before, but were definitely his style. They just looked better somehow. And was that a suit? Whatever. That was future Zoro's problem. He still couldn't help but feel that his arms were strangely empty, though. He slept fitfully through the night, always waking up with a feeling that he was missing something, and that it was just out of reach. There were a lot of confusing pictures and impressions floating through his mind, and he could never be sure if they were real or if they were dreams. In the morning, he woke up when he heard movement from Sanji's bunk. He didn't know why, but he tracked his progress across the room, suddenly on high alert and ready to jump out of bed too. Even after Sanji had left the room, his body refused to relax and fall back asleep. Zoro just felt even more confused. What the fuck was going on? Sanji was fine. After a good night's rest and some time to himself, he had reached the conclusion that this was the best thing that could have happened to him. If Zoro didn't remember the bet, that meant that Sanji's life could go back to normal. No more forcing himself to spend time with the mosshead. No more forced hugs or handholds or kisses or sharing his bunk or... He took a deep breath. He could finally focus back on his cooking and on making life on the boat easier for Nami and Robin. He entered the kitchen and started pulling out the ingredients he would need for breakfast. He stopped himself as he pulled out utensils for 2 people, though. No one else here but him, just the way he liked it. No one who could get in the way. No one who was trying to be better for Sanji's sake. No one to mess with his cooking. No one to laugh with him. No one... Another deep breath. He finished the last preparations just in time for the rest of the crew to arrive. Of course, Law was being dragged in by Luffy, as had become the norm for when the 2 crews were anchored in the same harbour. It didn't matter to Sanji. One more mouth to feed wasn't that hard, and Law was very easy to please as long as you didn't try to feed him bread. He and Zoro were very alike in that way. The green-haired swordsman was happy with anything, as long as he got a bit of sake to go with his food. The last few days he had always smiled when Sanji put out some extra just for him, and... He stopped himself and took another deep breath. He put on his best smile and started serving everyone with their plates. He even managed to keep up the faces when he placed Zoro's plate in front of him with his usual, "Here you go, Mosshead." Before he could walk away, though, Zoro stopped him. "What's this?" he asked, clearly confused. Sanji looked down at the plate, and his breath stopped. Without thinking, he had made the same special plate he had made the last few days, and not the bland breakfast that Zoro usually preferred. He had also given him the big bottle of sake, too, and not the usual one. Flustered and caught out, he turned away. "Sorry, force of habit," he mumbled, before fleeing back behind the counter. "We should probably talk about the elephant in the room," Nami said. "What are we going to do about Zoro?" "Don't talk about me as if I'm not here," the man in question grumbled. His arms crossed in front of his chest, and his face twisted into something that other people would call a pout. Sanji did not think that he looked cute. "I did some research last night," Law said, the cup of coffee Sanji had handed him prior cradled in his hands. "From what we know and what Sanji-ya and Zoro-ya told us last night, I was able to find out who we're dealing with." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded wanted poster. "Mind Eraser Hibiki, part of the Twister Pirates. They've been in the New World for a while, and the only thing of note is that they haven't joined a bigger alliance yet. This Hibiki has a devil fruit that lets him manipulate his victims' memories." "So what does that mean for Zoro?" Chopper chimed in, a curious and worried look on his face. Sanji was holding his breath as he waited for Law to continue. As far as I know, the effects shouldn't be permanent, but the reports about the duration have been conflicting. Some say they regained their memories after only a day, some took over a year, and some are still missing theirs up to this day. Well, that's good news. It took Sanji a moment to realize it had been him who had spoken. Every eye in the room was on him, so he forced himself to continue, as if he had meant to speak in the first place. That just means the moss head will be alright, so everything can go back to normal now. But Sanji, Nami said, a sad frown on her face, what about you? What about me, Nami-san? He asked, a sunny smile on his face. If you're referring to the bed, that was a stupid decision we made when we were all drunk. I think it's better this way. Now the mosshead doesn't have to be embarrassed that I had him beat. I will graciously overlook it this time, and not gloat about my deserved victory. That made Zoro snort. As if. I'm inclined to believe a lot of stuff, but me falling for you? In your dreams, shitty pervert. Sanji felt his smile slipping from his face, and the voice in the back of his head was getting louder. He never wanted you. It was all an act. You're so stupid, stupid, stupid. He fixed his smile before anyone could notice. Or at least he hoped he had. Think what you want, Mosshead, but when your memories return you'll know and you'll be forced to admit defeat. With that he turned around and started the process of cleaning up. It would take him a bit longer again, since there was no one helping him. He liked it better this way anyway. No second pair of hands next to him, no crooked smile, no companionable silence, no more. He took a deep breath. Everything was better this way. If he cleaned alone, no one would see him cry. He took another deep breath. Zoro didn't like this. He wasn't talking about the missing memories. Sure, he wasn't thrilled about that, but there was nothing they could do about it. It calmed his nerves that he would one day regain them, one way or another. No, what bothered him was Sanji. The cook had been his usual cocky, annoying self this morning in the kitchen, but at the same time, it hadn't been his usual behaviour at all. The words he said had been expected, but they didn't match up with his body or his face. Even his voice hadn't been as convincing as usual. He obviously was affected by what had happened in the last few days. His poker face had been good, but somehow Zoro still knew he had been lying. Maybe even to himself. It bothered him to see Sanji so unhappy. He had the strange urge to ask him what was wrong. He wanted to know what he could do to make the other man happy. And he had wanted to help clean the table, which was weird. Still lost in his thoughts, he made his way outside. A bit of training would help him clear his head. Before he could make the climb up to the crow's nest, however, his attention was caught by Robin, who was sitting by the mast and was waving at him. Curious, he made his way over to her. You need anything? He asked when he was standing in front of the older woman. Actually, I wanted to know if you needed something, she said with her usual mysterious smile. This must be confusing for you. If you have any questions or just want to vent, I am willing to listen, and you can be sure that I'll keep your secrets. Yeah, until you can exploit it for your own gain, you mean, he grumbled, but took a seat by her side. Maybe talking about this would help him, and if it didn't, there was always training till he dropped. Naturally, Robin answered. So, what do you want to talk about? There were many things Zoro wanted to ask, like what had all of them been thinking when they agreed to bet between him and Sanji was a good idea, or why no one had stopped them when things seemed to get serious or go too far. Had they all laughed about it behind their backs? Why do I feel the urge to ask Sanji if he's happy? That hadn't been what he had wanted to ask. She seemed to be surprised as well, but that was replaced fairly quickly by a bright smile. I don't know the answer to that, she said. But before Zoro could give her an angry retort, she continued, But I think you should ask him anyway. I mean, what could it hurt? And if you're doing that, maybe ask him about this as well? She pointed down between them. Zoro followed her finger and noticed a carving in the mast. His first thought was, oh shit, who had the balls to do that? His second thought was a simple, oh. Well, shit. Sanji was busy preparing lunch for all of them. If he was honest with himself, he would admit that he had picked a difficult dish on purpose, to give himself and his hands something to do that wasn't crying or trying to grab someone else's hand. But denial was so much more comfortable. He was slicing and cleaning the vegetables when the door opened. Thinking it was probably Chopper or Usopp on their way through, Sanji didn't even look in the direction of the door. Oi, said the last voice that Sanji wanted to hear right now. Or was it the only one? It was hard to tell sometimes. Without looking up, he answered, What? Are you happy? Sanji dropped his knife. He didn't care. Far faster than he thought possible, his head snapped around and fixed Zoro with a look. What did you just say? He demanded to know, his voice slightly shaky. Zoro was still looking at the dropped knife with wide eyes. I asked if you were happy. He looked unsure of himself, which was a look that Sanji would have never guessed Zoro could have. His shoulders drooped in disappointment when he realized that no, Zoro didn't have his memories back. It was probably something the others had told him, and now he wanted to tease Sanji about it. Suddenly he was feeling angry, and he turned back towards the sink and picked up a new knife. Of course I'm happy. I don't have to deal with you 24/7 anymore. So if you could leave my kitchen, that would be great, thank you. He started working on the food again, and waited to hear retreating footsteps telling him that he was alone again. But they never came. Instead, the footsteps came closer. You're lying, Zoro said, standing directly next to him. Why? I'm not lying. I really do want you to leave. Fine, then tell me why I carved our initials in the mast of the Sunny. Sanji was frozen to the spot. The image from the evening before flashed through his mind's eye. And had it not even been 24 hours since his life had been changed so drastically? And he tried to keep his voice even when he answered. I dared you to do it. Yeah, no, I don't believe that even for a second. Zoro answered. And why was he still here? Why wasn't he leaving Sanji alone? And even if we had been too stubborn to call this dumb bet off, neither you nor I would ever damage the Sunny. Not even for a prank. She means too much to all of us for that. Sanji's grip on his knife was so tight that his knuckles had turned white. He still refused to look up at the other man, standing next to him. What do you want me to say here? He asked in a quiet voice. I want to know if you're happy, and why. And this hurt. It hurt more than Sanji had thought possible. He let out a humorless chuckle. Why? So you can gloat about it. So you can win this bet after all. No thank you. I'd rather keep the last bits of pride that I have left. What? No. Zoro seemed genuine enough, but Sanji had been fooled by him before. He finally looked up. He didn't know what the look in his eyes was, but it was enough to make the other man recoil. Then why do you want to know? Sanji pressed out between gritted teeth. I don't know. That's why I'm asking, Zoro yelled back. That's not a good enough reason, Sanji decided. Just drop it, Zoro. Everything will be back to normal in a few days. There was silence for a long while, before finally Zoro seemed to take the hint and left. Sanji was alone again. He took a deep breath and continued with his work. Zoro didn't know how to feel. On one hand, he was only too happy to drop the subject and never talk about this weird experience ever again, but on the other, there was something in him that screamed not to do that. He would lose something important if he did. He decided training would be his best option to sort through these feelings. He went into their sleeping quarters to retrieve some of the weights he had stored there, but stopped in the middle of the room. His gaze glued to a familiar article of clothing. It was a shirt. His shirt, to be exact. Like in a trance, he walked over to Sanji's bed and picked it up. Without conscious thought, he raised it to his face. It didn't smell like him at all. The only thing he could smell in this was Sanji. The cook had been wearing this, probably to sleep. Unbidden, the picture of Sanji sleeping from the night before came back into his thoughts. Had he been wearing this then? A sudden but impossible strong urge to hold the other man close overcame him. It almost sent Zoro to his knees. He had never felt such longing before. He stared down at the shirt and came to a decision. Even if he didn't have his memories right now, his body remembered, and Zoro had always trusted his gut instinct. Now he only had to decide how he could reach his goal. He needed to speak with Nami. Hi, here is the second to last chapter. The next one is the last, so look forward to that. I think I'll probably post it on Tuesday, because that's when I next have the chance to record. Thank you for listening to the end. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.